Welcome to The Girlfriend God, a podcast in search of and in service to the divine feminine, bringing you an equal mix of academic research and emotional spiritual experience. Please rate and review on your podcast streaming platform. Leave a comment on YouTube. Be sure to hit like and subscribe. Let's get in the flow. Welcome to the Girlfriend God podcast. Today, I've got Dominique Williams, and Dominique is the community coordinator at WomanSpirit Reclamation, where she supports women in their journey to self-sovereignty and embodiment. Dominique actually studied marine biology and environmental science at the University of California in Santa Barbara, and now she dives deep in the work of inner child reclamation and rest as resistance. She is currently at work on a project based on the untold aspects of U.S. history, exploring the intersections between mental conditioning, spirituality, and restorative justice. Her upcoming class, Deprogram, Seeing and Healing Towards Liberation, begins this fall. And you can find Dominique on Instagram at Queen Tea or Queen Queedy. Queen, yes. Am I saying that right?
Queen Queedy, yes.
Queen Queedy, and in the show notes description for this episode, there's also a link to WomanSpirit Reclamation, which you might recall from the episode I did with Mona Chilson. And that is how Dominique and I met through WomanSpirit Reclamation, because we were both part of that sovereign priestesshood, sovereign sisterhood. I'm just starting to come around to embracing that priestess term. But anyway, Dominique, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Kelly. It's amazing to be here. I've never done a podcast, so I feel very honored.
Well, hopefully this is your gentle introduction.
Thank you.
So when we spoke on the phone, you said that you wanted to talk about the Black Madonna, which is something I know absolutely nothing about. I shouldn't say absolutely nothing, because I have a cursory knowledge, right? Because I'm, jack of all trades, master of none. So,
right. Well, I could talk a bit about the Black Madonna. I'm definitely not an expert on her history. I know that she has appeared many times to many people in many places, and she was revered across a lot of cultures, whether by Black people or people who are not Black, which I actually found very fascinating. But my experience with the Black Madonna is actually like very, very tangible, or very like, it's more experiential rather than like me having a lot of historical knowledge on her.
Right.
Yes. But I actually was introduced to the Black Madonna. It's actually kind of a long story. I can shorten it, but do you want to hear how we kind of came to be in contact?
So yes, I love it when people tell stories on this show. So please tell me a story about the Black Madonna and how you came to know or have this personal gnosis about the Black Madonna. Love it. Tell me. Tell me a story.
Thank you. So I want to try to keep it concise, but we can take it back to the beginning of last year. I had just been traveling in an RV with my partner. Their name's Taryn. And it had its pluses and its minuses. I mean, it was difficult. This is a time during, lockdowns and quarantines, and we just decided we wanted to get out of the city and we wanted to travel. So we didn't go very far. We just went kind of all around California. We went to the desert. We went to, the plains, like Temecula. It was really beautiful. It was this really embodied experience. I love nature. I studied environmental studies when I was in school, and that's where I actually feel like I started getting rooted in spirituality, being in school
Right.
and having so much nature almost like cocooned around me. It was beautiful. But we decided we wanted to try to settle down. So we decided kind of out of nowhere we were going to move to Albuquerque. We didn't really know much about Albuquerque,
Mhm.
but we saw there was affordable housing there. So we were like, let's try, settling down there. Wasn't really working, wasn't really able to put down any kind of roots or to settle in the area. I felt like I was very far from home and I feel like I had a lot of support. So I kind of started to crumble when we were out there in Albuquerque.
Mhm.
And this was in January of last year. And so my partner, we're both doing our own things, kind of like lashing out at each other or like, but it wasn't too crazy. But there was a point where my partner said, you can't stay here. Like, this isn't working. Like, this
Mhm.
is too much. And I think you need to go home. And at that point we were breaking up, but we kind of settled it and, decided, no, we're just going to try to be separate. But when that happened, I felt so, I just felt like so broken, which was crazy. I didn't, I never realized like leaving my partner, I was going to feel this kind of distress and so distraught. And I was just like, oh my God, my world do. And I was just at this really low place. And I had to wait one night for my family to come pick me up. My mom's so cool. She loves to drive. So if I ever need to be picked up from somewhere, she will get in the car and drive there. So she
Right.
and my sister, yeah. So she and my sister drove the 11 hours to Albuquerque to come get
Wow.
me. Yes. But like while I was waiting for them to get there, I just needed, I was looking for something to hold on to because I felt like I was so untethered and I just felt like just in this, almost in this dark hole. And I don't know how I found this, but I came across this book, this audio book called God is a Black Woman by Dr. Christena Cleveland.
I've heard it. Yeah, I've heard of it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And I started listening to this audiobook. I'm like crying, but then I'm just like settling down and I'm hearing, this audiobook being read talking about the Black Madonna. And it just, my whole world shifted that night, just getting introduced to this book, this concept of God being a Black woman. And what that book really gets into is kind of this concept of the God we've been indoctrinated with,
Right.
who she calls white male God.
Right.
And realizing that, you grow up and you think, well, this is just who they say God is, it's just God. But she
Right.
really puts this like this lens on it to see that that's not just some general God, that's a very specific God. And she names him white male God.
Right.
And there, white male God, he's not a very loving God, even
Right.
though they say he is. He's very wrathful, um, wants to shame, I think,
Right.
doesn't like neediness, you know, always wants to be exalted in glory. Not a
Right.
very loving, cushy God, right?
Right.
But in the book, she juxtaposes him to the Black Madonna, who loves us the way
Right.
we are, who loves who loves neediness. It's like I felt like I could come to her and I could shed so much and I could just be loved in my in my in my wholeness,
Right.
in my
Right.
brokenness. Like there's not this high standard to achieve to be worthy of resurrection or eternal life and things like that. She's like a grounded God, she's just here. She's very tangible to me. So meeting her at that night, that really changed the course of my life. I wanted to know more about the book. So I looked up God as a Black woman and I saw Christena Cleveland was going to be doing a Zoom conversation. And this was through WomanSpirit Reclamation. So this is how I found WomanSpirit Reclamation. And I think this was in like March. And I went to the Zoom conversation and it was amazing. I got to tell Christena a little bit about, how the book affected me. And then that's when I got in touch with Monette and Patricia Lynn Riley. And I knew I wanted to get involved with them and with their group. So I asked Monette, hey, like, how can I be involved? And I didn't actually have enough money to afford full membership. But the way, I don't know if you know, like Monette she's the most like generous person. And if you tell her you have a financial need, she will work with you for anything. And so, I mean, that's all I can really say. I feel like the Black Madonna has carried me through this kind of unbecoming stage of my life. Um, it's almost like I couldn't say enough to describe her bigness. You know, she feels like everything, and she feels like she exists with many names across many cultures, and it's just been unbelievable the way my life has changed since finding that book and the people who I found through her, I would say. Oh, I can't hear you.
Sorry, I muted myself because I
Yeah,
was
sorry.
tapping at the computer. So do you know about the Shrine of the Black Madonna in Atlanta?
No.
Uh, so there's a shrine of, it's actually a group. It's a split from, not a split, but like a spin-off of a church in Atlanta. Uh, and it was founded as the ninth congregation. I'm looking online as the ninth congregation of the Pan-African Orthodox Christian Church in 1975. Just thought that was interesting. So
Incredible.
I'm looking, since your experience was experiential. I've done this on episodes before, right? We just look shit up on the fly. Um, history of let's see what Google has to say, and then I'll try and determine if it's a reputable source
Perfect.
or not. Okay. So there's the Black Madonna in France. I
Yes.
knew about that, right? You know about that?
Yes, Christena Cleveland actually goes on a pilgrimage across France and she meets many Black Madonnas there. That's kind of the narrative of the story.
Okay. Uh, so tell us about that for the listeners that don't know about the Black Madonna in France's. I believe that's in the Chartres Cathedral, right?
Yeah, so there's many Black Madonnas in many places across France. They vary greatly. Some of them are very small. Some of them are almost tucked away in a little secret place. Some of them are very grand, very big, very regal. And I don't know how many, but like I would say thousands of people go to visit these Black Madonnas every year. And, you know, people who go to her to visit her, they are often people who are seeking refuge, maybe
Right.
seeking healing. And yeah, Dr. Cleveland, so she speaks to this kind of wound that I've experienced. And I think many Black women have experienced, which is like a wound in our identity and a wound in not feeling proud or feeling this deep shame of who we are and constantly feeling the need to make up for our identities. And Christina wanted to travel across France to see, I think, herself reflected in these Black Madonnas, as we all do, you know, to see ourselves reflected in, you know, God, to feel like we, you
Right,
know,
right.
they say God is made in man's image. So it's like, okay, well, where's the God who looks like me, right? So this journey that she takes, she really just kind of dives deep into the root of her conditioning, into the root of her shame, and just finds this incredible, I would say, liberation, this freedom in her expansion, in coming across all of these Madonnas. And it's an
Right.
incredible book. I would recommend it to anyone.
Well, I mean, my understand, like at its origin, right? I mean, so let's clarify some semantics, right? I mean, as a generic term, like all lowercase Black Madonnas refer to any iconography that by climate or location or artistic license or whatever become darker over time, right? They
Right.
start out white and then they gradually darken in skin tone. Do I have
Well,
that
not
correct?
not all of them. Some of them are dark from the very beginning.
Right, right. But the phenomenon, which we now know is not a phenomenon, but like when that first started to happen in France, they were like, the fuck is this? Right? Right, right.
Sure.
Um, but in terms of, I don't know, I guess kind of because it's a new concept, but it's an old concept. My first learning about any kind of Black Madonna was that it was a black version of Mary, right? And Mary is this kind of, I mean, first of all, Mary is an amalgamation of a lot of traditions and cultures and religions that Christianity conquered, right?
Right.
There's all this, in the season finale of season one, that's what we talked about was the Virgin Mary and kind of the iconography soup that went into Mary. Um, so I would assume that the Black Madonna is the same. I would guess that it's kind of like in order to keep a root tradition, right, especially one that is orally passed down from generation to generation to generation, when you are in a marginalized group, people tend to hide those things in plain sight, right? Like I just think about like like in Latin America or even in Mexico, right? Like their religious iconography is very Christian in nature, but hidden within that are roots of hoodoo and voodoo and other like Latin traditions. You know what I mean? Like they
Yes.
have statues of the Virgin Mary next to um I can't think of the name of whatever entity shows up
Perhaps
as
Saint
death.
Maya. Oh, death.
Yeah.
Like Santa Muerte.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. So you'll find Santa Muerte like right next to the Virgin Mary, right? And they
Right.
talk a lot in Christian terms, but that's not really what their beliefs are built upon. You know what I mean?
It's been codified.
Right. So I think the same thing happens with Black Madonna or Black spirituality in general. Does that make sense? Am I making sense?
It does make sense. I feel like the Black Madonna is like the way that our goddess has been able to take root and persist in
Yes.
in a culture, especially in a colonizing culture. I mean, it feels like a very grounded experience for me because even though I'm reading about Black Madonnas all across Europe, I just kind of relate it to my own experience here in America because, I'm very aware that when people, were brought here from Africa,
Right.
and forced to abandon, their traditions and their religions, the level in which we started basically coding our gods and our traditions in the colonizing um, culture. I think it's just beyond. I think that that's been a complete necessity for us to survive, is to hide our spirituality in plain sight. um, I think it's been a lifeline for a long time, for hundreds of years, thousands of years.
So I'm looking at this article from the University of Dayton. It's talking about Stephen Benko. I don't know who Stephen Benko is. Um,
Sounds very familiar.
Stephen Benko.
Mm-hmm.
Let's make sure he's a reputable guy. He's an author, but it looks like he's a reputable author. So, okay, good enough for me.
Yes.
I'm sure he uses citations and endnotes in his books. At least, God is willing, he does. So Stephen Benko says the Black Madonna is the ancient earth goddess converted to Christianity. His argument begins by noting that many goddesses were pictured as black. Among them, Artemis of Ephesus. I'm sure that my friend Carla can confirm that. Isis, Circe, and others. Circe, who was the Roman goddess of agricultural fertility, is particularly important because her Greek equivalent, Demeter, and Demeter derives from Gem Meter or Earth Mother, and the best fertile soil is black in color, and the blacker it is, the more suited it is for agriculture. Now, that sounds like it might be a stretch, but I think he's on to something, right? That all of these things have become, as you say, codified uh, over time. And I mean, this conversation has been in the public eye for a long time, right? Like, we've been saying for ages that even among Christians, Jesus was not a white man. Like,
Right.
but yet all our iconography suggests it to be so. You know
Right.
what I mean?
I
And
do.
um, yeah, it bothers me that people don't question these things more, like they're just taking it at face value. But I feel like it's so entrenched in our society that it's just, I mean, it's no wonder that people don't question it because it is so entrenched and it's been so entrenched for so long, especially here in the States, right? It isn't
Yes.
like that everywhere. I figured out the other day, somebody was complaining about their Google search results. And I figured out the other day you can set your search results to be search results for a different country when you
Right.
use Chrome as your browser. So I'm experimenting with that a little bit.
Oh, that's a
I
good
have
idea.
my search results set to like either Scotland or Wales. Of course, then I get a lot of search results in languages that I can't read.
Yeah.
But just to broaden the search a little bit, I had them set to the UK for a while, but I found that most of the search results, because that's all like white European, so my search results were very much the same as they are
Right.
here. Except when it came into terms of academic research, right?
Okay.
Because they have more history. They have
Right.
more history. I think, I have this theory that, in Europe, they're used to looking to the ancient past for answers, but here in the US, we have no ancient past. I mean, we do in terms of like who was on the land before us and who was on land before them and all the different ages of time and the ice age and all of that. So we do have an ancient history in that regard. But in terms of like, we don't have ancient ruins that we can go visit. We don't have a lot of archaeological digs in the United States. You know what I mean? So I feel like we are, as a people, Americans are limited by that.
Well, and I feel like we likely do have archaeological digs. I feel like when it comes to us be feeling rooted here,
Right,
um, or being able to root in our past, it's very difficult in America because our past is constantly being covered up.
right,
The narrative is constantly changing, and then we do live in a very consumerist society. So
right,
instead of us rooting in the past and understanding it to its full extent, they're constantly trying to sell us the next thing, the next thing to think about, to focus on, to consume, and so there's no real value put onto you know, the stretch of time, right? And
Right.
this story in its entirety, right, in this country. And yeah.
In terms of ancient history, I know that, and I can't remember who she was talking about, but uh, I did an episode. It hasn't aired yet because it's part of season two, but I recorded an episode with Kendall and Carla, my occasional co-hosts, and it was about uh, inaccurate representations of mythology and pop culture, like in TV and movies, and and Kendall mentioned the whitewashing of goddesses, and I think that's what that guy, that's Stephen Bento. Was that his name? No, I don't even remember. Um, like my brain has moved on. Whatever his name was, I think that's what he was alluding to, right? Like, yeah, there
Right.
has been so much whitewashing. Um, I know that, and I mentioned this in another episode this season. I was, because I'm old, right? Like I remember when the Shack was a big deal. Are you
Right.
familiar with the Shack?
Yes.
Okay. The other person that I talked to about it, he'd never even heard of it. He didn't even know what I was talking about. But what I remember about that, right? Because I read the book, because everybody was reading the book, and I wanted to know what the big deal. I was not impressed. It was not well written. It was hard for me to read it, not because of the subject matter, but because it was poorly written. Because
Right.
I'm kind of an elitist like that, I guess, but I can own that. You know what I mean? I can own that.
Yeah.
So, but what I remember is when the movie came out, the movie did really well at the box office, but people did not like that the Holy Spirit, which is historically associated with the feminine, but people had an adverse reaction, not only that the Holy Spirit was represented by a woman, but by a Black woman. And, kudos to Olivia Spencer, who I love. I think that's her name, right? Olivia Spencer. Um,
Octavia.
Octavia Spencer. I was close.
Yeah.
Octavia Spencer, I mean, who's just delightful, and I love her and everything I've ever seen her in. But there was like backlash to that, even though the movie did well. Like that's the thing that people zeroed in on. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Forget the message of the whole story itself, right? Let's
Right.
focus on we're pissed off because the Holy Spirit is a fucking woman, which
Right.
again, if you know the history or do some research about the Holy Spirit, even in the Catholic Church, it is often recognized as a feminine force. And when you go back to the Old Testament, and there are references to, a mother god, or, like pre-Mary references to this feminine force.
Right. Well, when it comes to the backlash, I feel like, it comes down to what our specific society sees as worthy of being called the Holy Spirit, and
Right.
what, right? And what our society, or who our society views as being sacred
Yeah.
and being close to sacredness, right? Because when it comes down to the church, first of all, they wouldn't let women be a, priest most of the time.
Right.
And you weren't going to see a person of color as a priest most of the time. So it's usually going to be like a white man. And this
Right.
white man is talking to you and saying, hello, I'm the mouthpiece of God. I am the intermediary between you and God. So I am the closest to God, the
Right.
closest to his image, and the closest to sacred. But what I love about Dr. Cleveland's work is the way she dives into who gets to be sacred, who is seen as sacred, and
Right.
why,
Right.
right? And why is a Black woman seen as the furthest from sacred? What is that? Because it really does rile people up. They get very upset when you suggest that
Right.
God could be anything other than a white man in the sky.
Right. Right.
And you have to question that.
Right. And I feel like when I talk to my friends in the UK, I do feel like it's worse here. Like I don't think they
Mm,
understand how bad it is here. I mean, and
mm,
that's also a geographical difference, right? Like I'm in the Midwest.
right.
right. It's worse here than it is on the East Coast or the West Coast, I imagine. But it is everywhere. And I've lived every place I've lived near or in a college town, right?
Right.
And wherever there's a college town, there's like that pocket of liberalism
Right.
and openness and a melting pot. And because it's a university, you have some diversity. Um, like we have a lot of students from we have the majority of our students are Asian, but we also have, from India and, all around the world. I mean, it's a highly rated in a number of areas university.
Mm.
Um, but if you drive 20 to 25 miles outside of town in either direction, like you're in like redneck conservative Midwest. And it was the same way in Pennsylvania. I mean, we lived close to Pitt. We lived close to the University of Pittsburgh. So there again, we were in this liberal pocket. It was also very white and very wealthy and very privileged, right? But again, 10 miles outside of town in any direction, and you're in, Trump country,
Right.
and uh, you can't make me wear a mask country because that's where we were during the pandemic.
Yeah.
And even in New Jersey, same thing. I mean, it was a little less so when I lived in New Jersey, because New Jersey is under the influence of New York, one of the most melting pottest liberal places in the world. Um, but even in New Jersey, certain parts of New Jersey, same sentiment. You know what I mean? So, I
Right.
mean, it really is everywhere. It really is everywhere. And I don't
Oh,
think I realized until I was, however far on my spiritual path, just how much I had been affected internally uh, by white male Christian dominance.
mm.
Especially since I wasn't raised with it in my family, right? Like my parents are liberal and I went to a very liberal school and, you know,
Wow.
but it's insidious, it's
Extremely
insidious.
so.
When it's
Extremely
embedded
so.
it's easy to spot when it's embedded in your family, but when it's embedded in your culture, power hides in plain sight,
Yeah, it's so
right?
strange because I grew up so heavily indoctrinated by who I see as white male God, and yet we weren't always the most religious or the most devout. I mean, I'm
Right.
right, like I have Christian roots on my dad's side and Catholic roots on my mom's side, and I feel like I was constantly kind of going between the two, and I've always felt very spiritual. So I've always been kind of looking for God, and so when they would bring me to these places, I would open myself to kind of try to receive the message of God because I wanted something, right? But
Right.
oh my gosh, it's so insidious and it's so indoctrinated. I mean, white male God shows up everywhere.
Right.
In academia, outside of the church, right? And
Right.
even
Right.
in a relationship I had where
Right.
the guy, he was a complete atheist. And yet I feel like white male God was very present there. So very
Right.
insidious and
Right.
completely
Right.
permeates throughout
Right.
the culture, which
Right.
makes sense. It's like, look where we are, we're in America. And
Right.
even places that seem more liberal, I'm in California, and I am glad for some of the more liberal things we have going on here, but at the same time, there's hella segregation. Here's
Hmm.
probably one of the most segregated states, which would sound very strange to people, but you go to if you went to the beach, some of the beach towns and stuff, it's going to
Right.
be all white people, and it was going to be a lot of the people who were very anti-mask and you know what I mean? It's like
Right. Right.
it's all over, or even like the segregation that persists through the policing system, right? Whether it's
Right.
California
Right.
or New York, we have some of the most heavily funded policing systems in the country. And so that's why, even though we kind of have that liberal lens, which can benefit us sometimes, you really do see the segregation persist, but it's
Right.
insidious. Yeah.
Right. But at least now it seems like, I mean, more and more and more and more and more information is being revealed that we never knew. But you know what I mean? It's become harder and harder to maintain the status quo because there is so much disruption. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like people like me who, I mean, I consider myself a well-rounded person. I consider myself a well-informed person, right? But even I fell into the category of somebody who, because I was never taught about it in school, didn't know about things like uh Juneteenth and the Tulsa, is it Tulsa massacre? Was it
Yes.
Tulsa? Yeah. Like, how did we not know about these things? You know, it's been common knowledge for people of color, right? But not common knowledge for us, right?
Well, not
Why?
even to me. Why? I would say, like we kind of were talking about the whitewashing of history. I mean,
Right,
America
right,
and our concept of exceptionalism, we are so concerned with our image and our appearance, and we have
right,
to always look like the most just, the most fair country. And so, uh, American history, the way we learn it in school, is
right.
very whitewashed. I mean, I could go on about the things that I didn't know. And, I didn't know about the Tulsa race massacre until maybe a few years ago,
Right.
and yeah, it goes on. I mean, it was nice because when I was in school, I was learning all of this kind of whitewash history, thinking this is just how it is, I guess. But I got to APUS history and I had this teacher,
Uh-huh.
Mr. Yant, and he started introducing new topics to us. He would talk about the complexity of the issue,
Uh-huh.
because we
Uh-huh.
we tend to get a very simple storied history,
Right.
in schooling, but to actually get into the rich, the complex history, it's like what he introduced me to. I don't know if you're familiar with COINTELPRO.
Mm-mm.
So COINTELPRO was an FBI operation done during the civil rights movement to take down uh, Black leaders, Black civil rights leaders. There's actually documents that came out showing that they were conspiring and likely, were participated in the assassination of Dr. King, along with many other
This is
civil
sounding
rights.
familiar. Like it's
Yes,
information that I've been in the vicinity of at least. I can't remember anything anymore, Dominique.
that's fair. Me too. I that's where we're at as a collective, I
Right,
think.
right,
But just, I wasn't introduced to these truths and realities until I was a
right, right,
junior. I was a junior in high school. So
right,
it's all of us. A lot of us, we kind of have no idea. And then you have that spark. For me, it was always someone introducing me to some new information, and then
right,
it kind of
right,
opens up your perspective, and you can't really go back after that,
right, right.
yeah.
You can't unknow this stuff once you know it.
No.
So it seems that overall, this the Black Madonna, that initially, like this initial phenomenon, right? The most at that time, the most commonly accepted theory was that the image's skin color was accidental and had to do with candle soot or aging or exposure to the elements. But then when people started asking questions like, really? Like, really? That happened to just her hands and face and like not the rest of the painting in terms of paintings or sculptures, right? So that was
Right.
clearly, I mean, in the light of day, that was clearly an attempt at whitewashing history. And now, today, I mean, scholars who research and talk about the Black Madonna see it as a much older, like we were talking about earlier, that this iconography, although if it's created in modern day times, like if it was created last week, obviously that speaks to something very different. But some of these older works of art are reflections of pre-Christian traditions and pre-Christian religions and practices with cults that did worship Artemis and particularly Gaia, right? Because going back to the thing about the earth and the richness of the soil, and I mean, how many fertility goddesses are there? And I would go on to say that, you know, some goddesses throughout time are also incorporating goddesses from other parts of the world, right? Because in when we're talking about pre prehistory and ancient history, there's still a lot of migration happening from one land to the next. So I am certain that there is an entire pantheon of African goddesses that I don't know about simply because I haven't researched that yet. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So just as, the Christian Mary is an amalgamation of a bunch of goddesses, older goddesses that came before her, the Greek and Roman goddesses are an amalgamation of goddesses that came before her, and those goddesses are conflations of goddesses that came before them, right? Like, so who's the OG? Like, that's my goal, right? It's like, I'm talking about the OG goddess, the goddess of all other goddesses, right?
Right.
So,
But I
I
feel like,
mean,
God, what a task to try to pinpoint, who's the OG goddess.
Right, right. Well, a
But
lot of people think it's Inanna.
yes,
Some people think it's Isis.
right. I feel like she could go even further beyond them to names that we may never know.
Right,
What
right.
I think is so interesting about these goddesses and trying to find the OG goddess, I feel like, I think they call Inanna she of 10,000 names.
Yes.
And I just feel like this goddess, you know, who we're seeking, I feel like she persists, if that makes any sense.
Yes.
I feel like she stretches across deep time in a
Yes.
way that even if we're never to know exactly who she was at the beginning, maybe we do know. I mean, what if she's the Big Bang? What if she's
Right,
where
right.
everything started? What if she's the earth herself? I just feel like whether we can find the precise name of who she was
Right.
in the very beginning, I feel like when we look for her, we can always find like her original energy, right?
Right. And that's what I believe that, I've mentioned this in a bunch of other episodes that my whole because people have asked me about the name of the show, and that is just one aspect or one facet. I talk about goddess as the diamond head god, because like a diamond, yes, I believe in all of these other goddesses that I speak to or speak about or have worked with in the past. And way in my past, I worked with gods too, and I've worked with ancestors and deities and other realms and all of that. But I think that all of those are facets of her.
Yeah.
They're all of her.
Yes.
Um, and that she is the one without a second, that she is the creator of universes and worlds, that she was what was here when nothing was here.
Right.
She is the creatrix and the progenerator. Is that the word I'm looking for? I feel like I'm using that word incorrectly.
Perhaps. Let's believe that you are using it correctly.
Okay, okay. Um, so yeah, and I feel like I don't know, I feel like on a closing note, because it's probably about time to wrap up, yeah. Um, I feel like the Black Madonna is just another example of that, right? It was something that was needed culturally. It was something that, maybe some of them were that phenomenon, right? Uh, a painting or a statue turning black over time. But if that's true, then that is clearly a divine message,
Right.
right? Whoever church that was happening in, maybe it was hey, stop fucking whitewashing me. who's Mary? You know?
right? Or like maybe she appeared as a reminder, right?
Right.
As a
Right.
reminder, I've always been here, you
Right.
know? I feel like she, who we're talking about, the great she, I feel like she's a womb. I feel like she's a great womb where all things originate and where all things return, you
Right.
know. And
Right.
I've personally, I've been working with a deity who's known in voodoo as Maman Brigitte. And I am
Hmm.
not a voodoo practitioner, but I've been looking for, goddesses that come, in forms of Black Madonna, and Maman Brigitte really stood out to me. And sometimes, you're not supposed to like take yourself through an initiation. They say it can be dangerous. So I
Right.
try to come to her with the most respect and kind of like, hey, I don't want too much from you. I just want to talk to you, right? So
Right.
she's become this intermediary for me, who I feel I can kind of speak to her and she can take me back to the source, right? It's like maybe
Right.
I don't know exactly who the source is all the way
Right.
when, but I think she knows her and she can be this intermediary because Maman Brigitte, she lives in cemeteries.
Right.
She is you could call her a goddess of death, but
Right.
in a very upbeat way. I feel,
Right. Right.
she loves rum with hot peppers. So, one of these days I made her a hot pepper rum and I bring it to the spot that I have for her. And
Right.
it's like a fun relationship that I'm cultivating with her, and to kind of get more comfortable with
Right.
darkness,
Right.
with death, right? But really, I feel like she's just that intermediary between me and the oldest of the old.
Right. Right. And I think the goddesses we need come to us when we need them.
I think
Right.
so.
Um, like I had, like when I was working with Hecate, it's when I was in a very dark place.
Mm,
So I needed a dark goddess, right?
yes.
To be able to help me and to be there for me. Um, and I feel like we can, if it's part subconscious, part just belief, right? Like I had this rant the other day about I don't know when unverified personal gnosis became such a fucking insult, right? I mean, because that's like how it's being used. Like, you don't have any proof of that. That's unverified personal gnosis. I'm sorry, but that's how we've developed spirituality, like since the beginning of time, right? Like in
Yes.
ancient times, and even beyond ancient times, even in the dawn of Christianity. How do you think they got this much power? Because they claimed to be speaking to and getting direction from gods.
Mm,
Isn't that unverified personal gnosis? I'm sorry, but
right.
um but I mean, we evolve and our brains evolve and we do like the facts, but then the
But
problem becomes, well, who's an authority and who's to say it's a fact?
exactly.
However, I mean, that's part of what we try and do, or part of what I try and do. I'm trying to get out of the habit of talking about the podcast like as if there's a we, because there's not. It's just me. I don't have a team that works on editing and putting the videos together. Nope, all me. Um, but that's part of what I try and do, right? Because I'm like, I am what's at the intersection of those two things because I was an academic
Yeah.
and I like my source material and I
Right.
like to know where shit comes from. But I was also a practicing witch. I don't really practice anymore. I mean, if somebody asked me if I was a witch, I would still answer to that because yes, I've done that kind of work. Um, but I do a lot of inner work and work with prayer and meditation, and I believe that that work happens in that place between this world and the next, right?
Mm,
So it's
hmm.
a bridging of those two things so that when I'm given information, when I'm given personal gnosis from that place, then I can take that to research and see what is a valid theory about this thing that I now know or think I know. You know what I mean? And blending the spiritual and the concrete academic. That's what I try and do with this show. And it's what I try and do in my own work, right? Like I'm writing a book and I'm drawing on both of those things. So I don't know. I feel like if we get more people on board with that idea, right? Like, yes, by all means, have your visions, but don't then go spouting about a goddess that you only kind of sort of know a little about based on what you read on the internet and speak it as
Mhm.
fact,
Right? It's the speaking
right?
it as fact and kind of speaking it with authority.
Right,
Um, but I feel like with the unverified personal gnosis, I feel like that used to be the root of spirituality,
right,
was sharing these personal experiences, with who you would see as a god or goddess. And, woman spirit reclamation, I feel like we're really grounded in that. I feel like
right,
we kind of sit in wisdom circle and we share our own unverified personal gnosis. But at
right,
the same time, like you said, it's like we can take that gnosis and try to see what does it align with,
right,
from an
right,
academic standpoint, because it can give her a clearer picture, I believe, of human history and of what's going on and what's always been, what have we always had here,
right,
it's the
right,
interplay.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's my utopia, right? I want, if somebody has a vision of Artemis with a vision of Artemis and she is adorned with bull horns, rather than going online and stating your opinion as fact and saying that Artemis is associated with bull horns. I want you to go to Dr. Ionescu, my friend Carla, one of the leading Artemis experts in the world, and ask her, Carla, is Artemis ever associated with bullhorn? You know what I mean? Or look that shit up on the internet. Like, know what you're talking about. That's all I'm
Yes.
asking. Take your personal gnosis and then add academic gnosis or research gnosis to it and present that. Because I think the lack of that is how we wound up where we are now, right? Where
Mm,
there is so much misinformation,
right.
where
It,
people didn't understand that if you can't give me if you can't cite your source material, then you are simply stating your opinion as fact.
right. And it's like you're not presenting a full picture of who you're
Right,
talking about,
right,
you know. Yeah, I feel like what it comes down to, I feel like the age we live in, the social media age and the kind of snappy age, I just feel like we want to take something, we want to run with it, and we want to
right,
seem perhaps like an authority or like someone who, is, I don't know. I don't really know what that concept is, but it feels very it feels almost for profit. You know what I mean?
right,
Well, I
right,
found this person, I found this goddess, so let me appear to be an expert on them so that people will want to give me money or something like that. For me
right,
personally, I feel like it comes down to kind of humbling ourselves. That's at least my own
right,
thing. It's
right,
like I feel like I had a dream and I think I may have seen Kali in the dream. I don't know
right,
if it was
right,
her, but I'm not
right,
gonna come out and say, oh, like I don't know anything about Kali except for how she's kind of appeared to me in the world, but I could never go and say, oh, I'm just this expert on this goddess. So it's really
right.
humbling ourselves, in my opinion. Right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. So one other thing, I saw that there's one other explanation associated with the Black Madonna. An early explanation was that it is, in fact, associated with a biblical verse in the Bride in the Song of Solomon. There are the lyrics, I am black, but comely, O ye daughters of Jerusalem. I'm not buying it that it comes from that. I don't know what was meant by that, but I don't think it was actually literally black. Maybe it
That's
was. Maybe it was. I don't know. That's interesting, though. That's an interesting fact.
It is interesting. Well, in the book, Christena Cleveland talks about a specific Black Madonna she goes to visit who has held over her head this slogan. that says, or it translates to, I am Black, but I am beautiful. And
Okay.
right? But really, to my knowledge, it's a misconstruation of the actual meaning, which was I am Black and I am beautiful. So I
Right.
think a lot of, interpretation gets mixed up, and it really kind of became an insult, to be like, I am Black, but I am beautiful. But to lead into I am Black and I am beautiful,
Right. Right.
I just feel like there's so much there, that you can't really fully unpack through a biblical verse. They can
Right.
lead us to some of these truths, but they're not going to tell us the full picture.
Right. Right. Okay, Dominique. So I ask all the guests the same 3 questions at the end of every show. Are you ready?
So I'm so ready.
Okay. So tell me a fun fact about yourself that people who know you would be surprised to learn.
A fun fact about myself. Okay. I love virtual reality video games, and it's actually my dream to design a goddess-based virtual reality video
Whoa,
with
okay,
a
all
with a
right.
solid story.
Nice. With a historically accurate story.
Hell yeah,
Nice.
we're gonna have a lot of sources, doctors and everybody.
Okay. Um, okay. Current favorite TV series or movie?
Oof. Ooh, current. Like, what am I watching? Okay, so I was watching this anthology series called Miracle Workers with Daniel Radcliffe and Steve Buscemi, and it's absolutely hilarious. So I could say
Okay.
that's my favorite that I'm watching right now. Um, and then was there another part to that question, or is it just
No,
that?
just
Just
that.
series. Okay, I was like, let me get a movie too. But I do want to tell you, my favorite movie also is Everything Everywhere All at Once.
We haven't seen it yet, but it's in our list.
Oh, please. It became one of my favorite movies of all time overnight. So, yeah.
Okay. I'm a lot older than you, though. So I've seen a lot more movies.
That's fair. We love movies in this house. So,
So maybe not. Okay. I
please
also
tell me
worked
what you
at I also worked at Blockbuster for like 3 years. So
Oh,
when
yes.
Blockbuster was still a thing. Um,
Yeah, we reminisce on Blockbuster, me and my mom.
gonna say that's a fun fact I should reserve for fun facts that people would be surprised to learn about me. Um, and finally, if your life was a movie, what would be the theme song on the soundtrack for the movie of your life?
Woo! That's hard because I listen to so much music.
I know, I'm the same way.
Right. Like my Spotify is my life. Um, I would have to say Free Fall by Rainbow Kitten Surprise. Um,
Okay.
and a few other songs from that album, mainly Free Fall. Maybe Devil Like Me also by Rainbow Kitten Surprise. So listen to those songs, listeners.
Okay. All right. Well, did you have fun?
That was awesome. I
It
had a
is
lot of
fun.
fun.
It's
That
a
was
fun
so cool.
show, right? I'm sure that I will be talking to you. I'm sure you'll come on the show again. Hopefully, in season 3, we'll have some panel discussions where I have more than one of you on at the same time. But until then, Dominique, thank you so much for being here and for being willing to come on the show and talk to me today about the Black Madonna. Have a wonderful day, and may the peace and love of the goddess be with you.
Thank you so much, Kelly.
Thanks for watching or listening. If you want more of The Girlfriend God, you can find The Girlfriend God and The Girlfriend God podcast on TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook. The Girlfriend